Hello, I'm Amanda Burrell, and this is Planet SOS. The land is one of our best weapons against climate change. But why are we destroying it? Scientists say humanity is stripping the Earth of its ability to sustain life. And that extends to the way we produce food. But we're wasting a lot of it while not feeding all who are hungry. We speak to people working to transform our relationship with the land, embracing sustainable practices. And we'll look at what's coming up at the COP, the annual climate talks taking place this year in Madrid. We begin with something which quite literally supports us, the land. We live on it, produce much of our food from it, and depend on it for other things such as fuel and clothing. It's integral to the planet's carbon cycle, drawing carbon dioxide down from the atmosphere through plants and trees and storing it in the soil. But we're destroying it. In August, the IPCC, that's the UN body charged with assessing the science on climate change, found the land's ability to sustain life is declining. Scientists reinforced what many farmers and vulnerable communities already know, that global warming is upsetting food systems, reducing harvests and intensifying poverty and hunger. But our land practices are making the impacts of climate change much worse. 1/3 of the planet's ice-free land is degraded due to deforestation, agriculture and other land uses which together account for nearly 1/4 of greenhouse gas emissions. The IPCC says action taken now to allow land to regenerate is vital in tackling the climate crisis, protecting biodiversity and securing our future food and water supplies. And this is going to mean a radical rethink of our relationship with the land. In a moment, we'll look at efforts to regenerate landscapes. But first, ways of living off the land in a sustainable way. One mechanism is land concessions, a system that allows for the private use of public land. David Mercer travelled to the Maya Biosphere Reserve in Guatemala, the largest tropical forest north of the Amazon. People in the village of Carmelita say concessions have enabled them to live off the riches of the forest while also protecting it.
Deep inside the rainforest in Guatemala's northern Petén region, Ermitaño Góngora searches the forest floor for riches. Ermitaño earns a living harvesting chate, a palm frond used in floral arrangements in Europe, Asia, and North America. The valuable leaf is part of the prize in a unique conservation strategy. Starting in the 1990s, 9 communities won the right to make a living from the forest, as long as they do so sustainably. Rosa Moreno says that her people's dependence on the forest gives them a powerful incentive to protect it.
There have been many changes to our quality of life. People make twice as much money harvesting shorte. Timber is another big earner, allowing us to invest in social programs and infrastructure. And we help other communities by giving them building materials for their schools.
The community concessions now generate more than $5 million a year and have created thousands of jobs in agronomy, carpentry and tourism. Poverty rates have fallen and migration to the United States is virtually unheard of. All the while, the areas under community management boast near zero deforestation rates over the past 14 years. Outside of the concessions, there are threats to Guatemala's forests. Clearing land for agriculture has given Guatemala one of the highest deforestation rates in the Americas. During the Easter holiday in 2015, Belizean farmers set fire to 3 kilometers of forest here along the border. Dozens of community members from Guatemala came out to battle the flames, stopping the fire from spreading into their community forests. Neftali Salazar helps cut and maintain 27 kilometers of fire breaks near the Belize border. His community is responsible for patrolling and protecting more than 25,000 hectares of forest, with little help from authorities.
If it
wasn't for our concessions, the forest here wouldn't exist. It'd be a wasteland. There'd be villages and pastures, and the cattle ranchers would be governing things. It's because of small groups like us that there are still green areas here.
Rosa's community concession and others are coming up for government renewal over the next few years. And with big business eyeing their forests, Rosa and her neighbors are worried. Empowered locals have kept the forest intact, but convincing politicians to do the same has not been easy. David Mercer in Guatemala's Maya Biosphere Reserve for Planet SOS.
So we need to protect the land, but we also have to eat. And the world's population is growing by more than 200,000 people every day. The Global Footprint Network says we're exceeding our planet's budget, consuming its resources as if we had 1.75 Earths to live on. And the food industry is a major culprit. Agriculture is responsible for around 75% of tropical deforestation worldwide. It uses 70% of the planet's fresh water supplies. 9 times the amount of nitrogen fertilizer is applied today compared to the 1960s. And this produces nitrous oxide, a potent greenhouse gas. And the same fertilizer produces toxic runoff, which kills wildlife and reduces the land's ability to absorb carbon. And then there's all the methane from record numbers of livestock. Add other elements, such as transportation and storage, and the global food system accounts for nearly 40% of greenhouse gas emissions. So how do we feed everyone in a way that sustains the land and protects ecosystems? Emma Hayward travelled to Wales in the UK, where some farmers are working on ways to do just that.
For farmers, looking after the land, whatever the weather, is a lifetime commitment. None more so than at the Holden family farm in the Welsh Hills, where they take a holistic approach to producing food. No chemicals have been used on the farm for 46 years. And they've sown herbs into the pasture land to build a carbon bank for the soil to help offset some of the methane produced by the cows.
That's chicory, and in here as well there's yarrow and burnet and other herbal plants which the cows love to eat, but also they have deep roots and they help re-enliven the soil and build the organic carbon bank which we need to address climate change.
Patrick is a pioneer of the movement to produce food more sustainably. He wants governments to support environmentally friendly farming methods while taxing those that pollute. And he's encouraging consumers to pay more attention to how the food on their table is produced.
A lot of farmers doubt whether the system could work and feed enough people, but here is a farm which is demonstrating that this is the future.
The IPCC, the UN's body on climate change, says global warming is already upsetting food systems, decreasing harvests and increasing food insecurity. But it says poor land practices are contributing too. 23% of global greenhouse gas emissions come from farming, agriculture and other land uses.
The change towards more sustainable farming is something we can't afford not to undertake, and we need to act immediately because we probably have only 10 years left in making these changes if we are to avoid irreversible climate change.
Looking after the soil and seeing its potential for combating climate change is at the heart of what happens a few kilometres away at Blind Camel and contributes to this organic farm's success.
The compost that's being created here is made up of only natural materials like grass, horse manure, wood chippings and even wool. It is biologically active with billions of microorganisms working to stimulate the life of the soil.
Here they aim to be carbon neutral but plan to be carbon negative, and everything that's grown goes into the local market.
By managing the farmlands of the world, you can bring carbon into a situation where it's stable within the soil, and that will help the future, not only for climate change per se, but also for food production.
Farming wherever in the world has always been tough, but a changing climate makes it even more challenging. Some farmers believe the answer lies in overhauling current industrialised farming techniques and embracing practices that both draw from and nurture the land. Emma Hayward, Al Jazeera, in the west of Wales for Planet SOS.
Well, there are many different views on how to improve the global food system to both protect the planet and ensure everyone gets enough to eat. For one take on it, I'm joined by author and environmental activist George Monbio, who is also a columnist with The Guardian newspaper. George, fantastic to have you on Planet SOS. There's a lot to change in our food system. Where to start?
The first place I would start is really switching away as much as possible from a meat-based diet to a plant-based diet. Livestock use roughly 3/4 of all the agricultural land that we use today, and yet they produce just 18% of our calories. It's a really profligate use of land, it is the biggest driver of habitat loss and of the loss of wildlife. Farming and fishing are, and livestock farming in particular, because of its incredible land use. And that represents a massive lost opportunity to protect our living world and also to absorb carbon, which we could do if that land was used instead to revert to nature and become wild ecosystems once more.
And what about the people who depend on livestock?
Well, of course, there are many people around the world who are subsistence pastoralists, and the last thing I want to do is to take away their livelihood or say they shouldn't be doing what they're doing. What we're talking about here, I think, is commercial livestock production for sale into commodity markets, and the argument being made almost unanimously by food writers and by celebrity chefs and by TV personalities is we should be switching away from intensive meat production to free-range, pasture-fed meat. That argument is completely wrong. In environmental terms, it's the worst possible thing you could be doing. So what I'm saying is that that's not where the choice should lie. The choice should lie between meat or not meat, and the choice we should make is not meat. Now, of course, there are commercial meat producers who would see themselves having to change their profession. And I'm saying, you know, let's make sure that we support them in that change. But, you know, no more than people who want to see a green transition have a moral duty to justify the coal industry, do people like me who want to see that transition take place in agriculture have a moral duty to justify livestock production. What we should justify is helping people to get out of it and into other professions.
Thank you very much, George. We're going to have to end it there.
Thank you very much, Amanda.
Well, there are many resources available to help us understand the impact we have on our planet. Here's one from the Global Footprint Network, which provides analysis and tools to encourage us to live sustainably. This footprint calculator helps us measure our own ecological footprint and consider solutions so we can tread more lightly on the earth. Where the combined human footprint is heaviest, land regeneration can help reduce the impact. More than 500 million people live in areas affected by desertification linked to climate change. 3 years ago, Jazeera visited the Great Green Wall, an ambitious project to restore land from East to West Africa by planting trees. Nicholas Huck returned to Mbar Toubab in Senegal to see whether, or not, it's been successful.
The fight against climate change starts here. On the edges of the Sahel Desert, villagers from Mbar Toubab are planting trees. They want to save their homes and farmland from the expanding desert. For this forest ranger, there's a sense of looming catastrophe.
We are in a situation of grave danger. If we don't plant trees, we won't get the rains needed to cultivate. Already rains have dropped. We need water to feed animals and grow food, otherwise people will move.
And they have already started. Across the Sahel, cattle herders are on the move. They're mainly from the Fulani ethnic group and are looking for a more temperate climate to feed their animals. That's led to conflict that's fueled by armed groups such as Boko Haram and Al-Qaeda in the Islamic Maghreb. Thousands of people have been killed in the Sahel in the fighting in the past year alone, but not in Senegal. Sergeant Goudiaby believes that's because of this tree planting project. In 2007, Senegal was among 11 African countries that pledged to plant trees in what they called a Great Green Wall from the east to the west of the continent. But 10 years on, most of the countries involved have dropped out because many of the trees have been killed by drought, termites, and an increasingly inhospitable climate. Temperatures are rising and rainfall dropping.
Experts say that if all the trees that were planted for the last 40 years had survived, then this would look like the Amazon forest. Well, instead, it looks more like this. The aim of the program is no longer to build a Great Green Wall because the desert is moving forward, but rather to find solutions so that the communities here can adapt to the changing climate.
For Senegal, this green wall is a long-term investment for future generations. Acacias are being planted as they can withstand the harsh conditions and thrive. Every part of the tree can be used. Achieving success now depends on finding species of trees that can be adapted to this environment.
Look at this moringa tree. It's got health benefits. If you give this to children, it will protect them and they won't get ill.
Polluting countries are investing in the green wall to offset their carbon emissions under climate marketing schemes. But by 2050, the global temperatures is predicted to rise by 2 degrees. The desert is rapidly expanding, and villagers here say they're racing against time to save their homes and strengthen the front line in the fight against climate change. Nicholas Hawk and Barb Toubab, Senegal, Planet SOS.
A reminder of how hard it can be to maintain solutions, even when they're up and running. I'm joined now by Mohammed Val, a veteran correspondent here at Al Jazeera who grew up in Mauritania, just north of Senegal. Mohammed, you've covered the causes and the effects of desertification and drought in the region, and you come from a family of farmers. This gives you a really unique perspective on what's going on.
Since the mid-60s, when I was really a child, it began to change drastically. Little rain and population moving from their villages towards the big cities because there was no help with farming. They couldn't sustain the way of life they were used to, continue over the centuries. That was a huge disruption, very difficult and painful phase of their life. Now, most of those villages are almost empty of their population. It's a very sad scene.
One of the things that we know we need to do if we're going to combat climate change and land degradation, which of course are very interlinked, is to actually really rethink our relationship with the land and to regenerate it. But how can that be done if people are all in the cities and the land has effectively been left?
It needs a big plan, not just the big words that we hear, from NGOs and governments and so on. It needs real and sustainable plan to convince people to go back to their villages and also really help them, not just talk about it, but do it. Many wrong policies were adopted, and those have to be corrected. This idea of, instead of helping people get water pumped from under the soil and, till the land and farm it again with new means and new technologies, the governments and NGOs resorted to handouts. So those handouts, monthly rations of wheat and sugar and things like that, made people rely on outside help, and they forgot. Not only forgot, but also they, just decided to abandon the way of life which they sustained for hundreds of years.
And tell me about your own story. You have a farm, is that right?
Exactly. I started this 10 years ago because I found out that whatever amount of talking you do to your people, they will not listen to it. You have to lead by example. So I relied on my own means and I started a farm. I dug boreholes and also 2 traditional wells. And out of those 5, I get enough water for what I'm doing so far. I rely on solar power. I continue to, refuse to use any industrial fertilizers or insecticides. So now it's completely organic so far.
It's been absolutely fascinating to talk to you, Mohammed. Thank you very much. Well, thousands of people are heading to Spain's capital, Madrid, for COP25, the annual climate talks. It's a last-minute change in venue after Brazil and Chile both pulled out. To tell us more, we have Mariana Hond in the studio. Mariana, it's nearly 25 years and we're still talking.
Well, nations have had their differences over how to keep the planet cool. But the need to act, well, that's something they've long agreed on. World leaders did that back in 1992 at the Earth Summit in Rio de Janeiro, signing up to the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change. Even in the 90s, they recognised through this international treaty that climate change was a problem, that human activity was the driving force, and that we all need to act. But what the treaty didn't address was how to reconcile the different interests of every nation on this planet. So every year since 1995, the Conference of the Parties to that treaty, what we now refer to as the COP, have come together to try to work it all out. Thousands of observers have joined them. There's been debate, negotiation, a lot of science, a lot of jargon, and some major disagreements, which makes the deal in Paris in 2015 all the more remarkable. Countries united behind limiting warming this century to well below 2 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels, ideally 1.5. They pledged to reduce emissions, and developed nations committed to a $100 billion a year fund by 2020 to help poorer nations adapt and develop in a planet-friendly way. Last year, they agreed to most, though not all, of the rules on how to do it, all with an eye on 2020 when they will lay bare what they've done and plan to do to cut emissions, which is why what happens in 2019 really matters. If rich nations fail to deliver on that $100 billion climate finance, it could revive disputes with developing nations over emissions. If countries fail to agree on carbon trading rules whereby polluters pay for their emissions, it could interrupt the world's transition to clean energy. And if nations fail to commit to new, more ambitious pledges, well, that could undermine faith in the COP itself. Donald Trump's plan to pull the United States out of the Paris Agreement late next year isn't helping, and carbon emissions are still on the rise. But as it stands, every nation is at the table, and politicians are still being confronted by the science, no matter how unpalatable some may find it. The Earth warmed by 0.5 degrees Celsius in the 20 years after that first COP meeting in 1995. But despite its imperfections, the COP is the only multilateral climate forum we have where nations can work on their differences. And right now, the future of our planet depends on it.
Well, to help us understand what's going on with our planet, here's our data tracker. Scientists say levels of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere should be at the 350 mark or less, but we're well past 400 parts per million. And as a result, you can see the average global temperature has gone up, as well as sea levels. Experts recommend we reduce the amount of meat we consume, and dairy too. But what if you could still have that burger without an ounce of beef in it? Well, a number of businesses are developing plant-based burger products. Rob Reynolds went to investigate whether fake meat has enough sizzle to catch on.
That tastes really good. This is a plant-based burger made by Impossible Foods.
What we do here is we take simple natural ingredients, we take our knowledge of what those ingredients are, and we recombine them to make amazing, delicious products.
The goal is to revolutionize agriculture, improve human health, and reverse global warming. A tall order for a little burger.
This company's goal is very clear, which is to eliminate the need for animals in the food system by 2035.
The people in this industry say that if consumers begin adopting plant-based meats in a big way, it could have an enormous effect on global warming.
The current system of producing meat is not sustainable. Ergo, it will definitely go away at some point. We've reached peak cow.
So, what's in it? Soy for texture, potato protein for flavor and nutrition, fermented soy for flavor, coconut oil for fat and sizzle, and other natural ingredients. Getting the taste just right is the priority.
The key to getting, very wide adoption of plant-based meat products is to actually give hardcore meat eaters the real experience, not like a fake meat experience, right?
Some nutritionists warn that the processed ingredients in plant-based meat are less healthy than vegetables by themselves. But the demand is growing, and plant-based meat is already being sold by fast food chains, fine restaurants, and supermarkets.
We want it to be accessible to the 9 billion people that are going to be on the planet in the next 20 years.
Feeding humanity and healing the planet? That's a win-win. So, bon appetit. Rob Reynolds, Al Jazeera, Redwood City, California.
Well, we may not all be inventing meat-free burgers, but whatever you're up to lighten our footprint on the planet, we'd love to hear about it. You can get in touch with us on Twitter using the hashtag AJPlanetSOS. That's it for this show. Coming up next time, we're looking at the impact of a warming planet and a growing population on the world's fresh water. Until then, it's goodbye from me, Amanda Burrell, and all the team from Planet SOS.